Okay, this will be my third and most likely final video on this whole Erika Kirk mystery. This is just such a bizarre story, and for this video, I figured I would just highlight a few of the best comments that people left on the first two videos that I did about this mystery. There were some really awesome comments left on the first two videos, so just wanted to highlight a few of them and talk a bit more about some of the really intriguing ones. So real quick here, I already did two videos on this insanely weird story of Erika Kirk, who was the Florida First Lady from 1967 to 1971. And she bears a striking similarity to the modern day Erika Kirk, who's Charlie Kirk's wife, who's everywhere today. And the first video I did just focused on Erika Kirk herself, who was this real woman of mystery back in the 1960s. She was referred to as Madam X. And in the second video I did, focused more on her husband Claude Kirk, who was really one of the most fascinating politicians of all time. He was just this really outlandish, flamboyant, like just totally outspoken politician. And this article here describes him as a dizzying experience and the most bizarre happening in Florida's political history. It's a very intriguing mystery to say the least, and I figured I would just talk a bit more about this mystery by highlighting a few of the best comments that people have left on the first two videos and kind of going into more detail on them. And first up is this interesting comment about the background of Erika Kirk, the 1960s Erika Kirk. So this comment talks about Erika Kirk's marriage to this actor named Carlos Dolabella, who she was married to before she married Claude Kirk. And the comment talks about this Carlos Dolabella's mother. And this is the really intriguing thing. So the whole background of Erika Kirk is very interesting. She was born in Germany and then moved to Brazil because she married this actor named Carlos Dolabella, who was a pretty well-known actor in South America at the time. And their whole story is pretty suspect. When this Carlos Dolabella met her, he claimed that he didn't know German, and Erika Matfeld, which was her name at the time, she didn't know Portuguese, so they would just use sign language and have a friend translate, and that's how they communicated. Kind of seems like a bit of a made up story about them meeting, but the real intriguing thing about this marriage has to do with Carlos Dolabella's mother. Because Claude Kirk met Erika Kirk, Erika Matfeld at the time, he met her through this Carlos Dolabella's mother. Her name was Marina Bucas. I'm pretty sure this is a picture of her that I just found on Facebook. And so Claude Kirk spent all this time in South America as part of some sort of mysterious investment company that he owned that had offices in Brazil and Florida. Obviously, that's a major drug trafficking route, and it really seems to me, at least, like this was a front for drug trafficking. I talked about that a bit in the earlier videos. But the strange thing is that there's a couple mentions of how Claude Kirk had to basically present himself to and get the approval of this Marina Bucas before he could get involved with Erika Matfeld, which is odd because Erika Matfeld and Carlos Dolabella, they were long divorced by this point. They'd been separated for years, and it was said this former mother-in-law, this mother of Carlos Dolabella, she was almost like a chaperone for the relationship between Erika and Claude Kirk. She would keep a quote unquote watchful eye on them while they dated. It almost sounds like she was like a godmother, like a kingpin type, that Claude Kirk would have to go to her and get her approval before he got involved with this Erika Matfeld. I find the whole thing pretty strange, actually. And the background of this Marina Bucas is real interesting. Her father was this guy, Valentin Bucas, who was regarded as basically this legendary businessman in Brazil. He was a big time executive with IBM, and he's credited as the person who brought IBM into South America. And there's even a documentary on the IBM website about Valentin Bucas, and he worked firsthand with IBM's president, Thomas Watson. And he was a really big deal. When he died, it was written up in the New York Times and described how he was a close personal friend of President Roosevelt. So he was thought of very highly. And the IBM connection is real interesting because there's been a lot that's been written about IBM's connections to the Third Reich. They were called perhaps Hitler's biggest business partner. They sold Germany just a ton of technology and equipment during World War II. A lot of American companies did do that, but I did find it a little curious that Valentin Bucas had this IBM connection. But the real interesting thing has to do with the last name, Bucas, because that's a Greek name. And I actually wonder if this family wasn't tied in with one of the most famous Greeks of all time, Aristotle Onassis, who I've talked about in a number of videos. Just an absolutely fascinating guy, one of my favorite people that I've talked about in my videos. I talk about him a lot in the video that I did on the Gemstone file. I'll link that video in the description. But Aristotle Onassis, I mean, this guy was just a baller. He lived on a private island. He owned the biggest yacht in the world. He's one of the richest people on earth during the mid 20th century. Has a ton of similarities to Blofeld, who was the main bad guy in the James Bond movies. A lot of people actually think that Blofeld was based on Onassis. And obviously, he married Jackie Kennedy after JFK's death as well. And the thing about Onassis with this Erika Kirk story is that Onassis was from Greece and then he moved to South America when he was 21. And the story goes that he was basically penniless when he arrived. And then he became one of the richest people on earth while he was in Argentina in a very, very short amount of time. And he was called the Argentine Dream because he became so successful. He built this just massive shipping empire and supposedly made all this money importing tobacco. But what was really going on was most likely drugs. Even in this article here about one of his former lovers, she talked about how Onassis told her that he was trafficking heroin to South America that was disguised in tobacco crates, and that's how he really made his money. And it makes sense because one of the main drug shipping routes at this time was from the Greece Mediterranean region, which is obviously where Onassis was from, to Argentina, which is obviously where he moved and made all this money. So the fact that Erika Matfeld, later Erika Kirk, married into this Greek Boukas family in South America, and Aristotle Onassis was a Greek in South America, I found that pretty interesting. And next up is a comment that someone left about this photo here, which is Claude Kirk holding up a dead chicken at a press conference. And this photo has always kind of been held up as an example of how outlandish Claude Kirk was, how he was always doing these crazy things for attention. But this commenter here said that there might have been way more going on here. He says, the chicken Claude held up isn't nothing, nor was it merely a stunt. What you're looking for here is more commonly called the Kapparot ritual. So this is real interesting to me. This Kapparot ritual is defined here. It says it's a pre-Yom Kippur atonement practice among some Orthodox Jews that involves swinging a live chicken over one's head while reciting a prayer symbolizing the transfer of sins to the bird. And you can find a bunch of pictures and videos and whatnot of this ritual online. And I just thought this was kind of interesting that there could have been more going on with this little stunt that he pulled with the chicken. I honestly think this happens absolutely all the time where there's like a deeper meaning behind some of these things that are said or done during press conferences, whether it's like a code or a message for other people who are kind of like in the know, or even some sort of ritual that is timed to take place based on some sort of esoteric calendar. I really, really do think it happens a lot where there's just a much deeper meaning to some of these things that go on during press conferences. So I just wanted to mention this real quick. And then this next comment was a real interesting one, I thought. It says, the last person to ask Charlie Kirk a question, Hunter Kozak. His father is a director on the Jimmy Kimmel show named Steve Kozak. Steve's father, Elliot Kozak, worked as a producer for Bob Hope. And this is indeed true. So this guy, Hunter Kozak, he was the last person to ask Charlie Kirk a question right before he got shot. And coincidentally, quote unquote, coincidentally, the question that he asked Charlie Kirk was about mass shootings in America. And then this video has come out about him kind of like almost like practicing his reaction before the shooting actually took place. He puts his hands on his head and he just kind of like randomly acts shocked for no reason. People have speculated that he knew the shooting was going to happen. He knew there was going to be a bunch of cameras on him when it did. And he was practicing how he was going to react for the cameras once this shooting happened. So this Hunter Kozak's dad is indeed a director for the Jimmy Kimmel Show. His name is Steve Kozak. He's a longtime Hollywood veteran. He's worked on a ton of shows over the years. And this Steve Kozak's dad was named Elliot Kozak, and he was regarded as basically the quote-unquote go-to guy for Bob Hope. He worked as Bob Hope's producer and agent for a very, very long time. And there's definitely a lot of stories out there about Bob Hope. This Bryce Taylor book talks about him a lot, claims he was involved in a lot of really bad stuff, to put it mildly. Definitely a bit of a controversial book, but there's also a lot of other people who've come forward and mentioned that Bob Hope was just a pretty rotten guy in real life. And Bob Hope and Claude Kirk, there is some photos of them together. They'd golfed together a couple times, and they both attended the opening of a golf factory that was opening in Florida. Couldn't really find much on whether they were closer than that or if this was just kind of a case of them meeting up once or twice, but I did find it at least a little interesting that there was at least somewhat of a connection to Bob Hope and Claude Kirk here. And the whole Hunter Kozak connection to Jimmy Kimmel and Hollywood is just one of the most baffling aspects to the whole Charlie Kirk shooting. If you remember, Jimmy Kimmel made some comments about Charlie Kirk, and that caused his show to get taken off the air for a while right after the shooting. Very strange that there's that connection too, and definitely find it very interesting that not only is Hunter Kozak's dad connected to Hollywood, but his grandfather was majorly connected to Hollywood. Honestly, it sounds like he was one of the most important behind the scenes people in Hollywood during his era. So definitely pretty strange that he just happened to be the last person to ask Charlie Kirk a question right before he was shot. And the next comment I wanted to talk about has to do with Wackenhut. So this is just such a fascinating, really interesting company. It's described as a private security firm, but they were just involved in a whole bunch of really shady stuff. They were described as the modern day version of OCP from the RoboCop movies. But what they were really involved in was surveillance. They were just a massive $600 million a year company, and Wackenhut themselves bragged to investors that they had a file on 2.5 million Americans at one point. And this former FBI director described Wackenhut. He said, "It is known throughout the industry that if you want a dirty job done, call Wackenhut." And I mentioned in the previous video how Claude Kirk, after he was elected governor of Florida, he hired Wackenhut to be a private security force for the state. And these private security officers were called Wacken Cops. And this group of Wackenhut investigators, these Wacken Cops, were basically given free reign by the state to investigate Florida citizens, to spy on them, and it was all explained away as Wackenhut's being used to crack down on organized crime, but it really was like a serious invasion of privacy and some real like New World Order type stuff to just give Wackenhut all this power to spy on and investigate your state citizens. And this comment about Wackenhut was real interesting. It says Wackenhut is also the company that built the private prisons that benefited off the gangster rap music conspiracy to put people in prison. And this is such an interesting story. So, a couple years ago, this anonymous letter was published from someone who claimed that they were a really high ranking music executive in the 1990s, and they were a part of a meeting that they described as, quote, one of the biggest turning points in popular music and ultimately American society. And the person who wrote this letter claimed that he was part of a group of music executives who were called to a meeting, and they were basically ordered to start pushing gangsta rap as a way to destroy black communities. And this was done on behalf of these large companies that owned private prisons because they wanted to have a steady stream of customers and a steady stream of income, basically. You can find this letter online if you just do a quick search. It's a really riveting read. It's really fascinating to read. But the crazy thing is that this was Wackenhut was the company behind this. The person who wrote this letter said they were all threatened with death if they ever revealed the details about the meeting. And it wasn't until decades later that this person finally came forward and wrote this anonymous letter. But it's really fascinating little side note to the Wackenhut story. And then Wackenhut also, as this comment says, did the security around Area 51, and they provide security to just a whole bunch of secret government locations and installations. Just really wild stuff. At Area 51, there are these famous camo dudes they're referred to as who roam the grounds of Area 51 and kick out trespassers. These are all Wackenhut employees. There's a lot of articles out there about these guys. A couple people also commented that Wackenhut was just a huge part of this octopus organization that Danny Casolaro was investigating and writing about. Just this absolutely massive web of corruption. And then Danny Casolaro eventually, quote unquote, committed suicide before he could release all of his research. Pretty much almost certainty that he was actually murdered. But Wackenhut plays a huge role in this octopus organization that he was looking into before his death. And I did just find it interesting how closely Claude Kirk was tied into George Wackenhut and giving him all this like New World Order-esque power in the state of Florida. And Claude Kirk even went on a vacation with Erika Kirk on George Wackenhut's yacht after he was elected. So they were definitely in pretty tight. And the next comment I wanted to talk about has to do with this movie here. It's called Three Identical Strangers, and it's a documentary that came out a few years ago. And this commenter here talks about the movie and wonders if there was some sort of eugenics connection with the movie. And very coincidentally, I actually just talked about this movie on Sam Tripoli's Tinfoil Hat podcast. I was on there just a couple weeks ago. So I was excited to see someone mention this in the comments, and I definitely think there is like a cloning or eugenics thing going on here as well. And it could kind of tie in with this whole Erika Kirk story. So, this Three Identical Strangers movie is absolutely wild. It's a documentary film about these three identical twins who were put up for adoption in the 1960s, and they were placed with three different families, and these families weren't told that these kids had identical brothers. So they split up the kids, and the brothers grew up not knowing that they had identical twin brothers. Then they went to college and randomly found each other, and it was this big story for a while in the 80s how they reunited. And their story is documented in this movie, Three Identical Strangers. And what they discovered was that something really sinister was going on because them being separated into different families was actually part of a scientific experiment. There were these psychiatrists who were separating sets of identical twins and triplets, and they were placing them with different families. And then they were not telling these families that these kids that they were adopting had identical twins and triplets. And some reports said that there were as many as 20 sets of twins and triplets who were separated over the years and placed with new families through adoption. And the real interesting thing is that these babies were placed with families from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So one twin was placed with a really rich, connected family, one twin was placed with a middle class family, and one was placed with a really poor family. And this was done with all of these sets of twins and triplets because the psychiatrist wanted to study if being placed in a different environment would affect how these kids grew up. So they were basically hoping to solve the whole nature versus nurture argument, the whole question of whether it's the environment we grew up in that shapes us into who we are and who we become, or if it's something genetic that causes that. And this is really so interesting to me because I've talked a lot about human cloning in recent videos. It's got such an interesting history. Human cloning was absolutely talked about just all the time 50 years ago. And one of the things that's talked about a lot in some of these books and articles is that human cloning could help settle the nature versus nurture argument. And there are all these books and articles that mention how with human cloning, you could create multiple baby clones from the same DNA and have these, babies who are basically identical. And then these babies could be placed in different environments after birth to basically determine whether it's the environment or genetics that shape who they become. And this is quite literally exactly what happened with the case of these kids who were featured in Three Identical Strangers and with a whole bunch of other twins and triplets who were unwittingly part of this experiment. And all of this was done out of a Jewish adoption agency in New York City named the Louise Wise Adoption Agency. And part of the reason I think this really could be a human cloning experiment, and there could be just way more going on here, is that the odds of this many sets of identical twins and triplets being put up for adoption, all in New York City, all at the exact same adoption agency. I mean, those are some really astronomical odds because, again, this was only in New York City, and every twin or triplet was adopted from the Louise Wise agency, and it all happened in a relatively short amount of time, just over a decade. And I talk about this movie a lot, The Boys from Brazil, but this is literally the plot of the movie. There's a bunch of Nazis who escaped underground after the war, and they create a whole bunch of human baby clones using Adolf Hitler's DNA. Then they place these clones with families all over the world in the hopes that one of these clones will one day grow up to basically emulate Hitler and lead a resurgence of the Third Reich. And I mentioned this in the other video, but Joseph Mengele, he was a very famous Nazi scientist, and he was basically obsessed with identical twins and performed all these experiments on them. He fled to South America after the war, and there's this town named Candido Godoy in Brazil that's known as Twin Town because there are just an abnormally high number of identical twins who live there. People have speculated that this was a byproduct of some sort of Nazi Mengele twin experiment with eugenics. Definitely sounds like it could be a cloning thing. And this comment about the 1960s Erika Kirk really caught my eye. So this commenter is very familiar with this whole Erika Kirk story, and he had a big long post about South America and cloning and a whole bunch of things. But he commented here at the end that Erika Kirk, Erika Matfeld, had an identical twin sister named Ingrid Matfeld, which is super duper intriguing considering all this information about cloning that this 1960s Erika Kirk could also have an identical twin. I looked everywhere to like verify this and I couldn't find anything that mentioned this Ingrid Matfeld identical twin. It's really tough to find really any information about this 1960s Erika Kirk before she married Claude Kirk, since she was pretty much unknown before he showed up to the inauguration ball with her and introduced her as Madam X to everyone. But whoever this commenter is definitely very, very knowledgeable about this whole situation. So I don't see why, he would just make this up. But I did find it just real interesting that this Erika Kirk, Erika Matfeld, could have an identical twin sister and could definitely tie in with all this eugenics stuff that was seemingly going on and the fact that, there's this modern day Erika Kirk who looks so similar. And a little side note here is that Claude Kirk himself also had identical twin boys. Not sure really what the significance of this is or if there's any sort of connection here, but I did find it interesting. And speaking of Boys from Brazil, a lot of people commented about that movie. Quick little note that they just announced that they're going to remake the movie. Netflix is going to do it and it's going to star Gillian Anderson. So it's Netflix. So I would say there's probably a 99% chance that they just totally ruin it and the movie's just absolutely awful. So my hopes aren't exactly high for it, but I am very intrigued by it and I'll definitely check it out. I'm very curious to see how they're going to cover it and what all they'll talk about in the movie. And so that pretty much concludes what will be most likely my final video on this whole Erika Kirk mystery. It's such a interesting, bizarre, just intriguing story on so many levels. It's been real fun to look into it. I wasn't really familiar with this 1960s Erika Kirk or Claude Kirk up until a few weeks ago. So it's been real fun to kind of learn about them and dive into this mystery, and just wanted to highlight a few of the best reader comments. I know there's some that I've probably missed or not mentioned in this video, but these were some of the ones that really stood out to me. And lastly, just wanted to give a big shout out to the subscribers here on YouTube and the supporters on Patreon. Thank you so very much for your support. It really, truly means a lot. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. So thanks again. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon with another video.